Hello, thank you for joining me once again. Today I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are on chapter 7, page 73. Okay, so sit back, enjoy, and thank you for listening to me read. Please subscribe, like, and share. And without further ado, let's start the reading. Chapter 7. The history of the Children of the Law of One from the beginning to 2001. Why the history? I was never fond of history in school. Thinking back on it, though, it was partly because it was both written and presented in a boring way. But that wasn't all. Specific dates of events were focused on far more than the story of the events. Furthermore, the portrayal of events often had either important omissions or additions that were outright lies or colored to fit into someone's program of what they wanted us to learn and believe. There's an old saying about he who wins the war writes the history, and that's not the half of it. My religious training as a child was fraught with similar problems, and I could not get what I considered to be straight, valid, or logical answers to my many questions. But I finally found a source of unadulterated history, and one far more interesting and far-reaching than any other. And it included both the secular history of the world and the religious history of multiple religions. But regarding some aspects of history, I still had a bit of a block left over from my school days. There was obviously a valid point to learning real history of any kind, at least in the sense of one who doesn't learn from the past is condemned to repeat it. And I had always longed for the history I was finally going to get a chance to learn. But nevertheless, at the time, I still had the rebellious school kid nagging me in the back of my mind somewhere because of my bad programming, saying, "What's the point? After all, be here now," had been my motto for a while. So even though it seemed ridiculous, I asked Zayn what I never had the nerve to say to my high school teachers. Only this time it was regarding the history of the children from the time of creation. What's the point? Here was his reply. To know the way of the One, how the universe is, how it works, the immutable laws behind its existence and functioning has always been fundamental to all children of the Law of One, knowledge and teachings. Even now, this knowledge can be helpful to those who seek to return to the One, to universal consciousness, to a way of living in harmony with the flow of the universe. To these ends, one should understand how the world as we know it became this way. To know the way it all began. Why? Backtracking. Like hikers who have lost their way, if they can determine how they got where they are and where they came from, they can find their way back. If they had a map, so much the better. Thus, the better we understand how we lost our spiritual existence, separated from oneness, and became trapped in the earth, the better our knowledge can help us to get free from our traps and return to our spiritual source. For your journey now, we offer you a map of sorts. The map is a story and a history. Written below is the Children of the Law of One's account of creation and the early days of life on earth. This same story has been passed on by our spiritual ancestors throughout time, since our beginnings on Earth. The adepts who transferred it to their students, who became adepts, who transferred it to their students, who became adepts, etc., and etc., have created a chain through history, a lineage of knowledge connecting us directly to our universal source. I give this to you here, as it was given to me, as it was given to my personal teacher before me, and to his before him. I now pass it on to you. An open link in your personal chain. Prehistory. I have edited the following story somewhat, adapting some modern English terminology and structure just for the ease of understanding, but the teaching is fully intact and very close to the original translation. Even so, you will not be able to truly or completely realize the meaning of our history and the separation from oneness until you are free from your earthly bonds and the limitations of your own brain and consciousness. But what can you do other than work with what you've got? So enjoy. So just to show you, it's written in the italic, okay? So this is the story. Know your true self and you will know the true story. Know your whole self and you will know the wholeness of the truth. All is one. There is no other. Thus it always was, and thus it always shall remain. We once experienced only oneness, one being with no divisions or separate parts. There was no time, no space, nothing other than us. When you are only one, there is only you, nothing else to interact with. In order to experience interaction, to experience being with someone else, to experience play, the one divided within itself, duplicating the one, thus creating many ones, many beings within the one. Part of this was what modern science calls the Big Bang. Still, being one, now in many parts were we, capable of pretending to be other than one, while still being one in harmonious consciousness. By vibration was it done, division, multiplication, and expansion of the one. Set into motion were vibrations throughout the universe. On it went, dividing, multiplying, creating new aspects of vibration through the overtones of harmony and ripples of the interacting vibratory reflections. Created this many new things and also initiated the time and space. Each of us were the entity of the one, the entirety of the one. The dark, the light, the stars, the planets, all of us, macroisms of the one. In clusters, groups, we were in all directions, we being the entire universe, we then roamed ourselves as consciousness, as beings that cannot be described or understood by the present earth consciousness. Yet describe, I will try as best I can. Our existence was, as close as you can comprehend in your present consciousness, as beings of spirit, energy, light, star groups, solar systems, the groups that can be foundations of vibratory frequency in creating the physical plane of matter, the appearance there, and that which forms the bodies of that plane, unattached, ever flowing with the flows of the universal one, were we, enjoying all the wonders of our new creation. Our consciousness, both semi-separate from, yet still one with, the entire creation of the universe, allowed us the experiencing of new and different things. But within this new creation were the material planes. These were the realms in which existed the most dense or slowest spectrum of vibration. There were many material planes throughout the universe, the earth being just one. The story I am about to tell is only of those who manifested in the realms of the earth, but others of us manifested in the material planes of other solar systems. Some are now of higher consciousness, kindred beings. Are they from other worlds? But some from other worlds are of the selfish and evil. When we came upon the world of the earth, we had no comparison, no experience of the like, no expectation of what would be. The first group of us to discover this material plane were in awe of the new sensations it offered. This first group, or first wave of souls to materialize, was the first to enter the vibrational spectrum of matter in the time-space of the earth. They experienced such pleasure from playing in it that they projected themselves deeply into matter in thought forms. The editor note, using thought to create a body. That were the most stimulating, the most sensational, those of the animal realm creations. In creating these bodies, assorted aspects of different animals were often combined to achieve what they thought would be very desirable blends. Bird head, human bodies, horse bodies, human head, goat head, human body, fish tail, human torso, and many more variations. Author notes, this would much later become known in Greek and Roman mythology many names: centaurs, minotaurs, mermaids, etc. Unfortunately, these ones, our close kindred, had no way of knowing that as soon as they had hardened their thought forms into matter, becoming these creatures, that they would lose all awareness, all consciousness of most things beyond their new bodies and their new immediate environment. They became trapped in these forms. The 7 ports, the chakras, were closed, cutting off their contact of the full vibrational spectrum, and thus all their perceptions and interactions were thus based only on the limited vibrations they could detect through only 5 vibrational senses. These 5 senses could only monitor very limited frequency bands of the full universal vibrational spectrum. And even in that, they focused on only those vibrations relevant to the material planes of the existence, leaving these humanimals without any sense of the spiritual planes of existence, cut off from the consciousness of the one, and thus the very universe itself. The humanimals experienced animal consciousness, but the being inhabiting these forms were not animals and originally of angelic consciousness. The combination of the consciousness that was meant to be of a higher form blended with the animal consciousness was a very inharmonious and disruptive mix. They lost the purity of animal consciousness and the purity of spiritual consciousness. So, this was a new kind of consciousness that was foreign to the animal realm. This new consciousness was separate consciousness and was of a fixed focus nature and reverse polarity in comparison to the consciousness of the One. Intelligence was also severely curtailed in the humanimals, being similar to the intelligence of these types of animals that they were modeled upon. But again, this was adversely afflicted by the negative effects of separate consciousness. Thus were the humanimals stuck in this limited plane, in limited forms, with limited intelligence, in a new limited consciousness. They didn't fit anywhere. They didn't belong in the spiritual realm any longer, nor did they belong in Earth's nature. Thus, their introduction into the Earth plane was also disruptive and polluting to the flow of nature. Those of us who did not project ourselves into matter were quite aware of the predicament and fates that had befallen our kin. From the vantage point of our natural etheric state of existence, we were still of one mind, one being. Seeing part of us in such matter-bound prisons as the humanimals had become trapped in was very painful. After all, the creatures were us, were our sister brothers, and their misfortune was our misfortune. In the terminology of some, they might also be called the first fallen angels, but they fell not of ill intent, but by virtue of ignorance of the purest kind. We decided to save them, no matter what the cost. We knew we could only do this if we could function on the same vibratory plane as they, so we too projected ourselves into thought form that we could function within the realms of the Earth Mother. Led by the great being who became known as the Atlantean Amelios, then later known as Thoth, and eventually well known as Jesus much later, the second wave of our entering into the plains of Mother Earth began. Careful to stay as beings free from the lower vibratory planes or hardening into the matter, we projected ourselves into the material plane with thought form bodies that were semi-etheric matter, but not matter. Thus, were we still able to function on all vibrational frequencies of the universal spectrum, free to enter or leave the limited spectrum of the material plane at will. But most importantly, we were very intent upon maintaining our consciousness of oneness so that we would not fall to the same fate as the humanimals. The manifestation was achieved more or less successfully, and as we became subject to the vibratory conditions which affect this realm, we saw the numerological representation of the physical plane, 2 and 5, appear in many aspects of our manifestation. For example, the beginnings of the 5 races occurred, and later the 2 sexes, each being having 5 appendages, two legs, 2 arms, 1 head, with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 legs, 2 of many organs, etc., and 5 fingers and toes on the same arms and legs. Despite our precautions and great efforts, some of us still fared not as well as others, losing more consciousness and hardening more than others. Those who manifested in Atlantis with Amelios fared the best, but for many this was to be short-lived. Until this time, we were composed beings, macrocosms of the One. Our bodies were not as they are now. Our male and female elements had not yet separated. As composite beings, we each had one body that contained both sexes rather than the male and female bodies we have now. The sexes then being just the inner and outer elements and outflowing and inflowing parts of whole being. These were soulmate groups, as they are called now. Each composite being had different numbers of parts, a different number of soulmates, each part a being itself, but fully as one with the whole being. We were like beings in which planets orbit a star, or the atoms of matter in which elements of different polarity, male and female, are attracted to each other, each finding a place where they harmoniously function together within the whole, as one entity, one being. As such composite beings, we existed in a state of unselfish love, constant flow, outflowing, giving fully of our life energies to each element of ourselves within ourselves, and receiving within ourselves and without, in our relationship with the One, which each composite being also orbited, creating the even greater ultimate composite being of the One. Now, for the first time, some of us had begun to separate within ourselves, manifesting as individual bodies representing the polarity elements. Bodies of opposite polarities then came into existence, male or female, sex. The work of freeing the humanimals began. It was arduous and complex, but it proceeded well at first. Unfortunately, the contamination of separateness slowly began to creep in. We started slowly tasting many of the things that had instantly trapped the humanimals. Divisions began to occur within Atlanteans over opinions and desires. The next symptoms of our disintegration was upon us, and this disease would eventually bring down Atlantis. Even in this higher state of manifestation, which we thought would keep us safe from the loss of consciousness that plagued the humanimals, some of us succumbed to the lure of material sensation. Like the drug addict would behave with an unlimited supply of drugs, we began to delve more into the indulgence of this plane until we were lost in it, drowning in it. In the frenzy of our addiction to physical sensation, we disregarded all our precautions and wariness. Soon our thoughts and actions had collected matter from this material world that surrounded us, and hardened our thought forms, making us matter-bound also. Our consciousness simultaneously slipped, and our gradual loss of consciousness of oneness gave way to that new consciousness of predominant separateness. The consciousness of predominant separateness was foreign to us, a totally new experience. And along with this new consciousness came new emotions, some pleasurable and some painful. Strange new things like greed, envy, lust, excitement, fear, desire. Some of us vigorously strive to maintain a balance of our consciousness of oneness along with the new consciousness, and we were able to experience the emotions without being ruled by them. Such were the children of the law of one, but others lost or chose to deliberately suppress even a glimmer of awareness of the one. These beings became lost and enmeshed in separateness. Outside of the consciousness of oneness, they became subject to being tossed to and fro by the tides of emotional onslaught and ultimately became devoted to personal power and pleasure in this physical plane. These beings became known as the sons of Belial, even if they were female. Take heed of the ancient warnings and prophecies about the Belialians. Lizard-like are they, not in appearance, physical description, but in the spirit form, in the heart, in the soul. Beware even now of your lizard kin, for they rule the world with greed and without compassion, while maintaining appearance of good and righteous. As men and women do, these sons of Belial walk the earth, model citizens, successful leaders who are the envy of the uninitiated. While some appear disgusting and strange to the eye, look not to see the ugliness of the Belialians with your eye, for some are handsome to see. See you will not their true lizard-like appearance with your earthly eyes. See their true nature you will only with the inner eye or glimpses from the corner of the eye. When this division came within the people of Atlantis, many things went awry, and turmoil began. To function harmoniously, beings need to have omnipresence. Their vision must include the whole picture. But when the attention is fixed and focused in the reverse polarity of separateness, all that is seen are parts of the whole picture. Those parts that are not filtered out by the illusions of separate consciousness. It is a limited view at best, and often is a lens distorted by emotions without awareness of the whole picture and the guidance of a coordinating force. Action become uncoordinated with others. To understand this better, imagine how well your present day body would function if each limb did not have awareness of what the other limbs were trying to do, or if each limb wanted to do different things from each other, no longer working together as one. Now imagine further. Imagine this lack of coordination keeping your eyes, ears, fingers, tongue, and mouth from working together as a team. Now consider the chaos and eventual destruction that would occur if every single cell in your body operated with no unified guiding force that keeps them coordinated with the whole. In fact, that's what cancer is. You see, this becomes the problem with our very lives once some of us lost consciousness of the one. Such uncoordinated, independent activity becomes a logical evolution when such a separation occurs and one is left with only an awareness of separation. Thus it came to be that the two Atlantean socio-political groups evolved with one very essential difference. The children had a consciousness of both separateness and oneness. The Belialians rejected the consciousness of oneness entirely and maintained only a consciousness of separateness. The difference of opinion between the two groups were great and many, including environmental issues. But nothing was more of an issue than the morality of how the humanimals were to be dealt with. Those of the law of one, remembering still that we originally came to this plane just to help release the humanimals from matter bondage, continued trying to free our trapped siblings. The kindred also created ways known to the initiate to aid in the maintenance of the consciousness of one, so we would never lose sight of our goals. But the Belialians wanted to use the humanimals for their own comforts and pleasures. Since those of us from the second wave were of greater consciousness than the humanimals and could still function on higher planes to some extent, we had powers of the mind, both spiritual and psychological. That made it easy for us to control humanimals. The children refused to use their abilities to control the humanimals, while the Belialians relished the power and wanted to use them as slaves. The other great division in opinion between the children and the Belialians was over the environment, as it is called now. The Belialians used methods of generating power, like electrical power, that were dangerous and destructive to Earth. Thus did the great conflict between the children and the Belialians of Atlantis begin. A conflict between light and dark, between selfishness and unselfish love. And the conflict that was continued throughout history and continues to this day. The Belialians' lust for power and lack of care or awareness of the balances of nature led to the destruction of Atlantis. Excuse me. This was due in great part to the abuse of their power generation plants. When the final destructions occurred, Grand Master Thought then led us to the land of Kim to complete the great work of evolving the humanimals. As gods we were to the people of Kim, and yea, did they think the humanimals to be gods. And so it was done. The humanimals were brought to human levels to choose their path from there. Yet there are the residual effects. Have you not seen the humans that look much like pigs or goats or this or that animal still? These were they. But even though the humanimals were no more, the Belialians had not lost their taste for slavery. Thus the great conflict with the Belialians was far from over, and still continues with the children of the law of one, as lamps illuminating the path of unselfish love, helping the lost find their way home to their spiritual heritage of the one, and to find freedom, while the disguised sons of Belialian and their pawns do everything possible to maintain their decadence and power, and maintain slavery, whether it be direct or by means of livelihood and social control. And they seek to destroy all those who would shine light into this world of darkness. All those who do not actively work for the light are to varying degrees pawns of the Belial's darkness. Recent developments from the beginning. The following is from a scroll that was later addended to the translation of the above story. But what is particularly interesting about it is that it's said to be written by the same author, the being who was also Grandmaster Thoth, but in a different lifetime. That same being was also known as Joseph, the son of Jacob, or Jesus in certain later incarnations. As it symbolized in this image the forces of darkness, and it was the yin and yang symbol, the round, the yin and yang, as it symbolized in this image the forces of dark and light, while in opposition, are in movement within the one, in balance. This is the proper state of things in the universe. On the earth plane, however, the forces of dark and light are not functioning in this way. They are not in harmony with the one. Those of darkness predominate greatly and attempt to eliminate the light. They battle endlessly with love and peace on one side, hate and violence on the other. Balance there is not, but balance you can create. Such is universal law, the law of one, and it ultimately prevails. Some in the future will claim that since it is all one, there is no right or wrong, no good or evil. But even though there is an element of truth, we are all one anyway, and thus none of this really matters. There is one important consideration. The lack of consciousness by some does create suffering and does create disharmonious vibrations within the one. When you are suffering, do you not want a remedy? Do you not want help to stop it? If you were suffering needlessly because of the illusions of good/evil, right/wrong, would you not want to have this pointed out and have assistance in finding a remedy? Thus, is not the remedy good? Is it not right? Do you not care about the sufferings of your brothers and sisters? As you have just heard, in days long gone by, Atlantis was split between the followers of darkness and the followers of light. Those who followed the way of the light, were known to themselves and other Atlanteans as the children of the law of one, as it roughly translates. From the beginning, the darkness was on the rise in Atlantis, and finally, as you just heard, the repercussions of this came upon us. How? Transgressions against the law of one, fixed universal principles, laws of the way it is, and against those of the earth's nature, which is in harmony with the law of one, were everywhere. Great harm was done to the earth by the followers of darkness. Natural imbalances were created by them. A pillar of the law of one is that of cause and effect. Thus did these actions bring about the physical fall of Atlantis. The greatest of these natural imbalances was created by drilling huge holes in the earth's crust down to the levels of molten earth. The Belials used the very gross physical forces of the inner earth to generate their power. They used concentrated light energy beams, authors note, like lasers, to bore great holes in the earth. Remnants of them can still be seen in many places. Authors note, notably such as Florida, the Caribbean, the Blue Hole of Brazil, creating their power plants was much like making a series of unnatural volcanoes, and it resulted in great instability and seismic disturbances. Even though they were warned of the consequences, the Balalians persisted in this unnatural activity until it caused the earth changes that destroyed Atlantis and the Balalians of that time. Before the final destruction of Atlantis, knowing the time, knowing the signs of those of us of light, went to many other parts of the earth in order to continue our work. As time went on, branches of the tree were created, and some of the other peoples of the earth learned from us the way of the law of one. Branches of the branches sprang forth. Most of the still known spiritual traditions and religions of the world have descended from us, though many are hardly recognizable from their origins, their relatives close or distant. Still, much confusion has risen. Some of these have become so distant and far from their beginnings that they are really instruments of the darkness now, while others have remained relatively true to their source and still serve the light. As was said earlier during the exodus from Atlantis, many of us followed Thoth, pronounced Thoth, T-O-H-T-H, to the land of Kim, now called Egypt. There he built the Great Pyramid and other temples and places of healing. The purposes of completing our work, initiating the wise and enlightening the ignorant. The work of freeing the humanimal was continued there. Modern science has surmised that these great pyramids were built by workers over many, many years for purposes of tombs. However, lacking any real facts from that time, these scientists make great assumptions, and their conclusions are truly unscientific. These great structures were in fact built by Thoth, using forces he controlled with the help of the advanced technology abroad. His terrestrial airship, authors note, a common Atlantean mode of transportation in those days of Atlantis. These vibratory forces could change molecular density so that the great stones could be made to float in air, just as wood floats in water. The power generating plants built by the children were very harmonious with nature, in stark contrast with Balalian's methods. The generators were simple pyramids that harmlessly collected the energy present in the Earth's aura, a frequency of the electromagnetic field, the field that makes a compass point to the north. The power generator pyramids used only crystals and copper capstones combined with a large peak release collector, a capacitator, inside the pyramid. This allowed wireless transmission of the power to any building or vehicle, including the airborne terrestrial ships such as Thoth's. The Great Pyramid itself was both a power generator, more about it can be found in the chapter on metaphysics, and a center for final stage spiritual initiation for the children of the Law of One. Its great hall was once lined with the painted tablets depicting the stages of spiritual development and initiation that were later to become the major arcana of the tarot. The human animals were treated in other pyramids. the various places of healing and consciousness raising that were built in that area. They were released from enough bondage there so that they were at least capable of finding their own freedom, their own way back to the one. But now it is not only many of the reincarnations of the humanimals that are lost to the one, there are many, many more, even more of those who helped save the humanimals. Thoth's ship remains hidden under the Sphinx. This may yet be found and used by initiates when it's time and needs arise. Between the Sphinx and the pyramid is buried a chamber that contains the records of our history from the beginning to the year 2001, known as the Hall of Records. This or the duplicate records in the Yucatan or the ocean will be found just prior to the great changes that will again rock the earth on its axis. Refer to author's note on page 86. Eventually, our work in Egypt complete, we left for places of retreat to create centers of refuge for the children. This was done so that the light would survive. Even as darkness continued to grow in the world, it was known that if our numbers remained at least 1,000, that the needs of those seeking light on earth would always be met. Excuse me. Master Thoth, aware of the ever-growing darkness that was to be, and knowing how the written word can be controlled and corrupted by the greedy and the power mongers, put the keys of knowledge of the spiritual initiate's path back to the one, into images on cards. As mentioned earlier, these were the first tarot cards, which were replicas of images that lined the great hallways of the Great Pyramid of Initiation. Thoth knew that images would be more difficult to change by the corrupt and more difficult for them to understand. He also knew that those on the path of ascension towards the one would someday see and understand their meanings and secrets. To further ensure the safety of these keys, he added more cards to the major arcanum, creating the full system of divination. The method of divination he taught to those of the land of Egypt who were leaving Egypt for other lands. Author's note. Wandering Egyptians that would later become known as gypsies. Knowing that these Egyptians would use the divination system to review the future of others for profit, he knew that greed itself would ensure that the Egyptian would preserve the images as much as possible, and that the knowledge would be preserved in many different lands. We then left Egypt and went to many lands, including those known at the time as Om, Oz, and the remnants of Mu. Author's note. What are now Tibet, Europe, parts of the Americas, and Asia, etc. Other Atlanteans who had not come to Egypt had already gone to other lands, some being of the one, some being of Belial. Some in new lands were called the children of the one gods, or the Great Light Brotherhood, or Great White Brotherhood. Others became known as the Magi, magicians, or alchemists. Many of the children use legends and guises to keep the politically powerful from interfering with them and their strange ways. Ignorant rulers were only too happy to let alchemists pursue their weird practices so long as it could result in discovering a means to make their ruler rich by changing common metal to gold. Still, others of the children were known as great spiritual teachers, thinkers, and creators in various forms of art. Many brought forth communities and monasteries to further the works of the One. In these places, the teachings of the One lived on in pure form and expanded, spreading the eventually becoming the foundations of other divergent philosophies and spiritual paths. A branch of the Magi formed communities around the 5th BC century, eventually to become known as the Essenes. The purpose of this community was specific: to live a strict spiritual life as pure and disciplined as possible in order to create offspring generations that would be of even higher consciousness, in order to provide the ultimate physical vehicles for the final incarnations of the being that was Master Thoth and his soulmates. This later incarnation became known as Jesus in the male. That same being had more than 24 incarnations, beginning with one in Atlantis, which became the basis of the story of Adam and Eve, which was told in the sacred scriptures of several religions. More about this in a later chapter. He appears in other places in the scriptures also, but his last physical appearance was as Jesus in what became known as the New Testament, which he actually wrote much of himself, although much has been tampered with. He now exists on greater planes in a way we cannot understand with our earthly brain. End of addendum. End of addendum. Back to more recent info related by me from my own experiences and those of other adepts and true teachers. Near current events. Okay, yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'll read that part and then I'll stop. Near current events. There was one community of Atlanteans who didn't live on Atlantis during the Great Destruction, living in total isolation from the outside world until a few decades ago. These people remained of pure genetic line of Atlantis. I won't get into that here for a couple of reasons. It's not pertinent to the goal of this book, and it is far too involved to cover properly here. Having a body that is of the pure genetic line of Atlantis is fascinating, but not really important. A body is just a physical vehicle. Adept monks, the initiates of the children of the Law of One, even though not genetically Atlantean children of the Law of One, are still of the pure line of totally keeping with the Law of One via spirit and universal consciousness. That is what really matters. Okay, so I'm stopping on page 84. So this will be part 1 of chapter 7. We stopped on page 84 of the Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Wasn't that fascinating? Please remember, subscribe, like, and share. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen. So until the next time, have the most benevolent day.